Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the art of advocacy. It's a very important work that we should be doing, advocacy work. In addition to being the best education that we can be, it's important that we recognize the importance of being an advocate. An advocate recognizes that we do not live in a just society. Advocates are not afraid to speak up and speak out for those who need that support. So, welcome back to another episode. We're going to be talking about restorative practices, restorative justice today. One of my favorite topics to discuss when it comes to school environment, school culture, discipline, if you will. All those things wrapped into one is a great process. And so I'm really excited for our special guest today who will be sharing her insights, her knowledge, and expertise in regards to restorative justice. Now, can't forget, but as always, this show is sponsored by Leading Equity, becoming an advocate for all students. If you haven't grabbed your copy yet, please grab your copy, support your boy. Really appreciate that. If you have the book and you enjoy the book, jump on Amazon. Do me a quick favor. Jump on Amazon. Write me a quick review. That helps out as well. Now, for those who are out there, feel free to say hello. As always, feel free to drop your comments and thoughts into the chat. I'll be going back and forth and bringing up some of those comments on screen. So feel free to do that. If you are not subscribed to the show, why aren't you subscribed to the show? That should be the first question. But if you're not subscribed to the show, please subscribe to the show. Follow the channel. We just hit 500 subscribers today. I'm excited. The goal is to get to 1,000 by January. Not a tall order. I believe in it. Okay, it took some time for the podcast to grow, and I know that the YouTube channel will grow as well. So subscribe, hit that bell, share, all that jazz. Get ready to get your pen and paper because I'm going to bring on our special guest in like right now. But hold on, let me read her bio real quick. Miss Davina Ruiz has been an educator for 15 years, holding many positions such as teacher, coach, district administrator, dean of school culture, etc. Davina is a firm practitioner of restorative practices, collaborative, problem-based interdisciplinary units of design. So, without further ado, I'm bringing on Davina right now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk to you. Now, you and I are already friends, so we've known each other for a while. Shout out to George Valenzuela for connecting us on some projects that we were working on before. So I'm glad to have you in this capacity on the microphone. So I read like 2 sentences of your bio. Why don't you share a little bit more about yourself and what you currently do?
So I've been in education, like you said, for about 15 years, but it's actually been more than that since interning as a young girl, deciding what I want to do. Currently, I'm an assistant principal within the New York City Department of Education. I'm an educational consultant with schools outside of NYC DOE. I actually do restorative circles as volunteer work, I would say in the South Bronx and parts of Manhattan with recently juvenilized, basically youth. So that's what I'm currently working on.
So you said that you do that work on the side as a volunteer. I'm just curious, what made you, the passion is there? Like, what brought you to wanting to volunteer?
So unfortunately, being in the school system, I've seen students fall victim to systemic racism and pressures within our school systems and outside of other systems within New York City Department of Education. I would say even law enforcement, and the list goes on. And unfortunately, I've had students that are recently incarcerated youth. And I still remain in contact with a good amount of them, especially one young lady who I actually mentored, visiting her at the juvenile center, visiting another former male student of mine at the juvenile center, and seeing how their voices were not heard, just like they were not heard within school systems, and then later on within their jobs, to then eventually get incarcerated and not be heard in the juvenile detention centers, made me realize this work is it's bigger and it needs to continue on. One actually came out of jail, but is having a hard time getting acclimated to being back into society and into a community. And that's where the restorative circles come to play, so that they don't repeat that same mistake and fall victim to those same pressures again.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm a big proponent of, if I don't do it, who will?
Yeah.
So it just sounds like, this is one of those situations. So even though it's volunteer work, you're not getting paid for it, but it is something that you're passionate about. And, again, these youth probably could definitely benefit from your support. So it sounds like you're doing some amazing work. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned restorative circles. So I hear a lot of, restorative circle, restorative practices, restorative justice. Sometimes we hear restorative something. And I would love to see if we can start off by kind of breaking some of that down. What does that mean? Is restorative justice and restorative practices the same? Is that the same? Is it synonymous with circles? Could you break that down for us?
So restorative practices, just restorative in general, just to means to heal the community and the environment and the space. So to bring it back to what it once was, and to bring the trust back for all members in that community and space. Practices, school systems stay away from saying justice because sometimes people see a word just like they see CRSC or SEL, and there's this negative connotation because people misinterpret what justice means. But in reality, restorative justice means that both the victim, right, and the student or the person that committed the crime, they restore back their relationship and everyone receives justice, including the community. However, because of the negative connotation, schools have been moving, and I can speak really for New York City, have been moving away from the word justice instead of moving it more towards practices where students are not facing this kind of system of let's figure out what's going on with the student and the situation, and this discipline shouldn't only be left up to deans and administrators, but instead it's involved with every single person within a school community, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a paraprofessional, whether it's a secretary. So I think we've just been moving along that line of restorative practices so that it can be more proactive than just reactive. Sometimes people hear justice and they automatically assume, okay, discipline, punitive approach, the person that committed the crime, you're going to suffer the consequences. And we just pull away from that word.
It's unfortunate that semantics makes such a big difference, especially now in our current political climate.
Yeah.
So I wasn't familiar with that.
Unfortunately, it happens, and we're seeing it across other big, buzzwords in education right now, that we have to move away from certain words and phrases just so that the work can get done.
Just so the work can get done.
Yeah, it's about the kids, not necessarily the phrase.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for explaining that. So essentially, restorative practice and restorative justice is the same thing. It's just the justice piece can often come with a penal, disciplinary, criminal type of connotation towards it, versus practices kind of makes it seem a little bit more on the, we're maybe on a collaborative type of community-based type of mindset. Is that correct?
Yes, because again, it's about interpretation
Yeah.
of a word, but then people's implicit biases of a word that play a factor as to, oh, this is what restorative justice is, when in reality, no, your implicit bias made you feel like justice is a negative connotation for both victim and the person who committed it.
You better tell it. Okay. All right. So here's the question then. Where does the circle piece, the restorative circle, where does that fit into the restorativeness, if you will?
So circle is a symbol of trust, but it's also a symbol of everyone being on the same playing field. So there's no hierarchy in a circle. Everyone's on an equal plane. So when we have a restorative circle, it allows for every single member of that community to speak without hesitation and without the pressure of feeling like they must fall down to whoever would be the quote unquote leader. In a circle, everyone is technically a leader and has a part to play within that community.
Okay, that makes sense. So everybody, there's no hierarchy, there's no person. So even a teacher or whoever's facilitating the circle, let's just call it an adult, they are at the same level as everyone else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sometimes though in a school, and here's where you really have to know the climate of your school
Mhm.
as well as know your staff well in terms of their biases. Sometimes you can have the wrong person being a facilitator in a circle, aka a teacher, where they will then do all of the speaking or be selective as to who speaks in the circle, and they're doing the restorative circle incorrectly. That should not be the case. At times, you will have someone from outside of that classroom community come in because they don't have a bias, they don't know the ins and out of that class every single day to facilitate the conversation. They won't necessarily speak and make judgment, but they will kind of make sure everyone in that circle has something to say, including the teacher, as well as check the tone, the volume, and the message within the circle.
Okay. Now, most I would say I would imagine the folks that are watching this are familiar with school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
Um, I know that that could be a benefit, or restorative practice can be a alternative to the school to prison, zero tolerance. What are some other benefits that you would say? Like, why would I want to have restorative practices at my school?
So, one, it does create this environment of respect and rapport. It does help build trust. And when the trust is built, then you do a better job in managing student behavior. I'm going to be honest with you.
Mhm.
It strengthens the relationships between all community members. And when I say all community members, I mean even security, even the lunch lady, even the janitors, everyone. It teaches students values, especially when you embed the values of the school within your restorative practices over time. It fosters this sense of inclusion and belonging for all students and for all community members. It has a meaningful approach to punishment. So it's really kind of getting an understanding of when I misbehave in this classroom or when I misbehave in school, is it because I'm being defiant or is it because I'm uncertain of what are my expectations, which then can have the teacher or actually the admin reflect on, okay, what's the message we're telling children? What's the purpose here? And are we being clear? And then lastly, it allows for it to be proactive in terms of reactive when handling students, uncertain actions of discipline or defiant actions of discipline, I would say.
Now, help me understand a little bit more because you said and I wrote this down,
Mhm.
the uncertain behavior. Tell me a little bit more. What does that mean?
So, most people, let's say most teachers from year 1 to 5, right? After
Okay.
5 years of teaching, then you really get an understanding of kids, depending on what group of kids you teach, but you get an understanding of where they at cognitively.
Yeah.
And you begin to see, okay, certain actions that a child will do is cognitively appropriate. So I'm not going to take it personal.
Mhm.
Most times I'm coming from a middle school background, mainly a little bit of high school. So when I talk about defiance versus uncertainty, it's pretty much we talk to a kid and we say, are you being defiant? Meaning, do you understand the directions I'm giving you and my expectations in class? Do you understand my expectations of your relationship with your peers in this class? And if a child can explain it very clearly, the expectations, then they're just simply being defiant. They don't want to do it. And now the circle is really, or the one-on-one conversation is really getting to the understanding of why are they being defiant. So it leads the conversation differently. When we talk about uncertainty, is like, okay, am I using the appropriate language to access this child? So sometimes, I have come across as an educator certain teachers or administrators that don't understand when a child is uncertain of the expectations. And it could be due to a speech delay, it can be due to a cognitive delay. They just simply don't get what you're trying to say because how we deliver those directions is not accessible to that child. So now I know I can't punish this child or I can't guide this circle a certain way because he's uncertain of my language. So how can I make sure this child access what we're trying to get at here? And a lot of times that's a fine line, especially when people are not reading the important documents of our students or understanding this is an English language learner. So maybe he just didn't understand the words I was telling him, or the phrases and what they may mean, because of in New York we say it this way, but in Cali we say it another way. And I've come across that in classrooms as well.
I feel like just that piece alone that you just explained with the uncertainty versus defiance is a hiccup that I see a lot. I mean, even without restorative practices in your school, that seems to be one of the reasons why a lot of students end up in office or
Mhm.
get sent, you know, expelled or suspended and all these kind of things
Mhm.
because maybe the teacher didn't know whether or not the student was being defiant or if there was
Mhm.
some uncertainty there, and so they responded off of their bias
Yep.
maybe.
Yep.
Okay. And they sent the kid to the office. Why aren't we all talking about? I feel like we should all be talking about this. Why are you just now like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts? Why do we feel like this is where we're at though? I mean, I just feel like we're missing like so many folks. Just hearing that 5 minutes of your response right there, to me, that would change a lot of things.
Yeah. And honestly, it starts with policy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can have someone like me go from school to school to school, but then if you come across an educator like myself, you also know the importance of staying at a school for a certain amount of time to build
Mhm.
that sense of trust community within the school building and outside of the school building. And I don't have many schools under my belt within my career, but the schools that I do have, I've been there past 4 or 5 years. So I can go back and they know exactly who I am, from the corner store to, again, the lunch ladies, to the people that are in the parks. Like, they know me. And that's really, really important. But you don't come across someone like me all the time. So where we need to change at, in all honesty, is the policy. We need discipline codes changed across the United States of America, where we're trying to get an understanding of all of our students, even our most vulnerable students, and how do we approach them when it comes to handling discipline. And even discipline, I hate saying that word because of the negative connotation, because you think I'm going to give you a consequence, and I don't necessarily believe in consequences if a child was uncertain of the expectations. And that's when you get that battle between community members, where the expectation is for admin to suspend the child, but your directions were unclear. So, it could go back and forth.
Well, what's an alternative to discipline? What would be another term that we could utilize?
Um, Sometimes I know in my former school we used to say give backs, not
Give
doing
backs.
consequences, give backs. We would say accountability measures. So a child would be, okay, well, you're going to receive an accountability measure. So after we did our restorative circle, we are going to give you a task to see if you really understand why your actions harmed the community and how can you repair it. And whether it can be that the students are doing a PSA for the class, or whether they're going from different classrooms creating projects for whatever action they did, whether it's anti-bullying, whether it's using a derogatory term, there is some sort of project involved with the give back. You're just not getting a code designed by a larger school system to then be tracked across your record.
You know, I often hear restorative practices as being described or labeled as an alternative to school discipline.
Mhm.
Do you agree with that or do you think it's more than that?
I think it's more. I think
Okay.
right now education is stating it's an alternative to school discipline because they're throwing a band-aid on the real problem, which is rewriting the policy of our systems altogether. That's what needs to be done, where you embed the practices within it. But it shouldn't be an alternative, because when you say an alternative, people don't understand the word alternative. So they think, oh, it's an option. It's not what alternative means. Um, so I hate when people say that word alternative, because then a school can decide, well, in this situation, I'm going punitive. But in this situation, because now you have implicit biases or explicit biases, for this child, I'm going to go a little bit more restorative because I know this about them. And they don't realize that's not okay. Every single child should have a restorative approach. So,
Okay, so then I like what that makes sense. Okay. The idea is like, if we're going to do restorative practices, we're going to be restorative practices, right? It should be across the board. So going back to your conversation or your thoughts on the policy, the handbook, you know,
Mhm.
sometimes a traditional school handbook, you know, if you did this, this is the you know,
Mhm.
this is what's going to happen to you if you do this or if you do that, you know, this is our rules. Are you suggesting maybe that we need to take that out, or should there be rules, like, just so I can understand what you mean by looking at those policies?
Well, rules govern society, so we still need the rules. That should remain. I think what happens when children don't meet our expectations or don't meet the rules, that's what needs to be changed. So, for example, suspensions, right? Usually in a traditional system, educational system, a child, you put in a code, a child gets suspended, they're
Mhm.
get sent to a separate site for a certain amount of weeks or months in some cases. When they come back, it's kind of like you do a reentry with admin, teachers, the kids get sent back to class. But there's never this re-entry circle with the classroom community. So
Mhm.
now every child in his or her class knows this child was suspended for a certain amount of time. Thanks to social media, they probably know why the child was suspended. And that child now has to re-enter their classroom community, and there's no restoration process. Like they're just expected to go about their business and handle everything perfectly fine and deal with the comments that their peers may say, you know, or the assumptions that their peers may make, or even the assumptions other educators may make about them. So there's no restoring or bringing it back. And that's the aspect of certain things that may happen on a tier 3 approach using the MTSS system. I will want to see policy slightly change, and I see it. It is a work in progress. The New York City Department of Education is actually actively working on embedding restorative practices and changing it within our discipline system. It's very clear, is in the forefront right now, but we know this takes time, and I would like to see all cities or all towns across the United States change this, if possible, the world. You know, I think Australia does a really good job. They were the first ones to embed it. Oakland City Schools do a good job. Portland has a really nice MTSS Tier 3 approach to handling restorative practices. So if the cities across the United States can just get together, we can do a better job for our children.
It feels only that simple. It
I
just
know, right?
y'all just get together and just talk it over, and
I
we'll
know,
be fine. Yeah.
I know.
Wishful thinking, but
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, yeah. If that was the case, I think that would make a difference. But we still have schools that do
Mm-hmm.
zero tolerance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. That's still a thing. So
Yeah. And
we
it's a slow shift over time.
mhm,
You know, I don't want to pretend that I had a restorative mindset my entire educational career. And
mhm,
it's what I tell every educator I come across now. I tell my story. You know, I'm coming from a private school background, including teaching for some time. And then I moved over into the public school system. And I had a very punitive approach to discipline. And when I came to public schools where, you know, the parents are not paying tuition and schools can't just say, I'm going to kick you out.
mhm,
No, it's your educational right to have have an education. I realized, wait a minute, I'm the problem. It's not the kids. I'm coming into their space and I'm expecting them to just respect me and do what I say, but I didn't take the time to build a relationship with them first, to be vulnerable to them first. And I had to change my own practice, and it took I would say a good 3 to 4 years, you know, and that's what I tell every single educator. If I can do it, I'm a stubborn little thing. If I could do it, I feel like anyone can do it.
okay. All right. So we've talked about what restorative practices is, what circles are. We talked about some of the benefits. I guess the next question that I have is so what are some challenges? Like, what does restorative practice look like if it's done incorrectly? Maybe that's the question I need to ask you.
The main challenge first is mindset.
Okay.
Um, And that's where we go back to implicit biases that educators or students are not aware of, right? It's the main challenge. The second would be when the facilitator, and I've seen this often, the facilitator themselves have an opinion because off of what a student may have said in the circle and now take control of the entire conversation.
Mm.
Or they allow, you know, the most direct, blunt student to take lead of the conversation and cannot bring it back so that every single person can speak. That would be another challenge, you know? And
Okay.
then the third, and I know you asked for probably like one, but I really have to say it, are students with disabilities.
Yeah.
You know, they oftentimes, or ENL students, they're left quiet, and a teacher may think, oh, they don't want to talk. Okay, just pass the talking stick. Just pass the talking stick. No, maybe that child cannot access language. Maybe they have a speech impediment. Like, I get it. Traditionally, a restorative circle involves using words and language, but there's other ways. Maybe you want to assign that child to a buddy, or maybe you want to allow that child to draw out and use that as a tool. Just letting students see that people communicate differently and to be tolerant and respectful to your community members, because when we become adults, we come across that. You know, I've come across adults that don't have the proper language for whatever reason, but I still try to understand them.
Mm.
I'm empathetic to their needs and respectful to them. And I think they're lost oftentimes in the circles.
Okay. So that's something to be mindful of for someone who's facilitating circles is
Mhm,
even though a child might pass the stick off, they don't speak or any of those things, there could be a reason or a story
mhm,
behind that.
mhm.
How would you suggest a teacher find that out? Like, learn more about that.
Individual conferencing.
Okay.
Doing something like a kids talk, and a kids talk is like you select a child like that, and you ask the child respectfully, who do you feel comfortable with the most in the school, and then you have that educator, para, it can be the secretary, payroll secretary, have that person then interview the student, and asking them questions that can help with them participating in circles or getting an understanding as to why they feel uncomfortable speaking. Oftentimes in the past, you will have students, and maybe because I'm coming from a school where school culture is very strong, you would have a student say more than one adult. So it would just be a conversation between two or three adults and the student, asking them questions like, why don't you feel comfortable in the circle? Like, what's going on? How can we, make it better for you? What can we do? And the students are honest. Once you say, I'm really interested in hearing your feedback, they'll tell you. So I would say the individual conferencing.
Individual conference. So it essentially the entire school staff needs to be trained in restorative practices. This can't be
Yes.
just your teachers and your admins. This
No.
needs to be fully staffed training that needs to be happening.
Yes. Because how someone talks to a child will play a factor on the trust later on in a circle, and I've seen it fall apart. It can also cause staff members to kind of have, my New York slang, beef with one another, right?
Okay.
They have problems with one another because they feel like, oh, well, this child respects you, but they don't respect me. And in reality, it's because you're talking at the child, you're not talking to the child.
Mm.
You're listening to react, instead of listening to understand. And that's something you learn through restorative practices. So to avoid that, everyone should just be trained.
Everybody should be trained. That should be mandatory. Um, Something like that in order for this to really work. And to me, that makes sense. And really, whenever you're doing any type of, multi-tiered system, all those things, PBIS, to me,
Hmm.
it should be your whole staff should be familiar with what's happened, social emotional learning, everything.
Hmm.
Any of those type of strategies, frameworks, there it should be a staff wide situation.
Hmm.
Um, Now with circles, I've talked to teachers
Hmm.
about circles, for example, and they would say, yeah, when we would circle up, the students would basically default to, oh, somebody must have messed up. Someone must have done something bad.
I'm happy you said that.
So, okay, I want you to touch on that. What would be your response if you had a teacher that said something to you like that?
You need to change your circle. So there's many types of circles.
Mhm,
People only want to circle up when a child does something bad. But you have community building circles that you can do in advisory just so that the children can get to know one another and you can get to know the kids. You have school-wide expectation circles. So if there's a new initiative going on in the school, you can do a circle for that. You have celebrations. Remember, indigenous populations will do circles for celebration. So if a
mhm,
child had, growth in an ELA score, growth in a math score, like you can do a circle and you can honor them for that. You can honor their culture at home or, within their home, within their, like I would say, nationalities. You can honor that in a circle. It doesn't always have to be negative.
mhm,
Sometimes, and I've done this where it wasn't discipline, but it was more of healing. I came across a group of students who identified within the LGBTQ plus IA community, and they had a hard time navigating that as middle schoolers. And they had, common struggles of their parents understanding how they identify as and who they like. That was a healing circle. And I would take those young ladies and I would do a circle bi-weekly for that particular subgroup in the school community just so that they can vent and they can get some understanding of why they're similar, but as well as get an understanding of why their parents are the way they are and how can they navigate their relationships with their family as well as within the schools and each other. So it doesn't always have to be negative and a
mhm.
child has to act out. If you keep it negative, the children do not want to do the circle. Point blank, period. It's the same thing I tell parents with parent engagement. If you only call home for the negative, do you really think that child's going to build a relationship with you? No. Why do you have to just highlight the negative? Highlight the positive as well.
So the circling can also be a way to, again, be proactive as opposed to reactionary. So
Mhm,
if you're only doing it because somebody messed up, someone did
mhm.
something, there's some harm done, if that's the only reason why you're doing those circles, then it defeats the purpose, and then ultimately the kids aren't going to want to look forward to doing circles. Now
Mm.
you mentioned you could do these during advisory times. Would you recommend class time being spent on circles?
Um, I would say if you're going to, and I've seen it done, especially within the ELA curriculum, where students were looking at zero tolerance versus restorative practices in school systems. But the ELA standard they were really addressing was central idea and using textual evidence. I've seen it done within units of study using readings and students doing arguments within a restorative circle. So it doesn't only have to be done within advisory. I would do it in clubs. I would do it during lunchtime to build a sense of community for students. So I wouldn't just put it in advisory. I do think for advisory programs, you get the most bang for your buck, though,
Why is that?
because most students do better when they have that one adult or at least two adults that they can always go to
Mhm.
navigate the struggles of being a high schooler or of being a middle schooler. And I do think if every adult is paired up in the school with a group of kids, it builds a sense of ownership where it's not just your kid, your class, it's our kids, our class, our school. Um, so yeah, advisor
Gotcha.
you get most bang for your buck.
Most bang for your buck. All right. Now here's the other question I have for you, because a lot of times when I see a lot of restorative practices being done, it's usually student to student, harm being repaired. Can a teacher or a staff member be a victim in any of these situations?
Do you mean teacher to student or teacher to teacher?
Well, either of. Yeah, yeah, yes, yes, that's what I mean.
I've done both.
Okay.
I've been
Tell
the
me more.
facilitator for both. Um, so when it's teacher to student, usually it goes back to what we were talking about prior, where a teacher was just listening to react, but also has some sort of bias and um, has some stereotypes in mind about a group of students, right? And
Mhm.
it can be based off of what another teacher said who had them prior, or it can just be honestly a number of things where they're more suburban in their upbringing and the children you're now in an inner city school and you don't understand certain things. So I've had circles for that. Um, and it's always rough in the beginning, I think more for the teacher than the student because it's harder for an adult to be vulnerable than a child.
Mm.
Um, and usually, to prepare for that, I will talk to that educator one on one first and prep them on. I'm going to ask the children to be honest. So be keep in mind they will say the truth, or at least they will say their version of the truth. But I'm not here to judge. We're not here to judge. Now, if you have a strong facilitator, they'll make sure that the children do it in a respectful way. But here's where the facilitator is key because if you have no control and if you as the facilitator don't have a good rapport with every person in your school building, I wouldn't lead that type of conversation. And that conversation should never be held with admin, in my opinion, which is interesting, right? Because now I'm sitting in the role as an administrator. But
Right.
when I was prior teacher, usually admin would want me to do it. Because again, a teacher would feel like, oh no, the administrator is now judging me and will hold this against me when doing my formal or informal observations. And I understand that now. So as an administrator, I'm not sure if I would do a facilitation between teacher and student, only if the teacher feels comfortable for me to do so.
So, okay, so should there be, and I know some schools can afford it, but like a recommended restorative practice facilitator, like this is what they do, is they do the facilitating so that it's kind of more of a neutral entity as opposed to being an admin. I'm just curious.
So again, that goes with the culture of the school.
Okay.
Now, if your school has it where you have many partnerships and many consultants and your community is used to that, you
Mhm.
may benefit from that. I know for schools that I've been a part of to have a consultant come in who doesn't know you from a hole in the wall, you're not going to be as successful. I do think it just needs to be somebody that the children and the teachers know. Usually, you get the most strength when you've been there a long time as an educator, and the community recognizes who you are, and they're like, you know what? Yeah, I respect her. She's been around long enough to hold these type of conversations. When it
Is it a
comes to
matter of trust? Like, because I know people that will come in, again, this is what they do. They do restorative
Mhm,
practice for a living, and so they're trained or
mhm,
negotiators and
mhm,
mediators, and I have all that background. But you're saying, from what I'm hearing, is that doesn't matter if they don't know you. If there isn't any sort of rapport already, that then it's not going to be helpful.
mhm.
That's what I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, basically. And you can have it where a consultant or a partner will come up into a school. I would say don't run to start doing circles. I think most of your time for the first half or at least a quarter of the school year should be about understanding the school and building trust with every member of that school community through different workshops, through different community building activities to then lend itself into you eventually doing the circles. I can only again really speak for inner city schools that I've been a part of. That's important. Like
Mhm.
they need to feel like they can trust you, especially with the large school system. You want to feel like you can trust someone who's going into your class or coming into your space. You don't want to feel judged. You want to feel like they're going to help you be your best self.
Got you. Okay. Okay. I makes sense. Never
Yeah.
thought about that. I just figure, oh, you got someone that has all the background, has the training and knowledge. But again, it really boils down to the relationships. And you
Mhm,
mentioned the importance of, like, if you've been to been around the school for a few years versus being a brand new person to the school, even if you've only been there 1 year versus being there 5 years, that can make a difference
mhm.
with school culture.
Yeah.
So makes a lot of
I
sense.
mean, you can also have someone that has been there only a year or two who can have a bigger impact than someone that's been there 5 years. I think what's more important is how you go about building your relationships with people on staff. I think that's the biggest thing in order to do this work. But you
Have you
just want to come out the gate like you need to do a circle. That's yeah, like that's not gonna work.
not the best approach? Okay. Now, have you worked with parents? Have you done circles where parents were involved, or those type of
Yes,
situations?
yes, I have. First couple of times didn't go as well,
Okay.
right? And I think it's because our school at the time was really trying to navigate circles with parents and with adults in the school building. But
Hmm.
then we realized the importance of building community norms, which I notice is a very big thing in professional learning workshops. But there's a reason why, right? So I think once we realize, okay, we need to build community norms and have the members state it, the parents themselves state it, then the circles went better, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And we
So
even had like translators and circles and yeah.
okay. Okay.
Hmm.
So if I am looking so let's just say I am a school, one of the schools or districts that we don't have restorative practices at our school. But with pandemic teaching and everything else going on, teacher shortages and substitutes and everything right now, it's hard for me to add on to my plate
Hmm.
to bring it into school. Do you have some suggestions for those who might be in those type of situations? As far as maybe it's not restorative practices, but it's something that kind of you can work towards so that maybe next year you can really plan it out and really start to implement. What are some things we could do between now until the time that we're ready to really bring it into the school?
I would say norm your ladder. So think about across all classrooms, what are your expectations in terms of like behavior with students?
Mhm.
And then think about how you're going to handle it. Whether the first time a child is misbehaving or doing a certain action that you don't feel appropriate is it, make sure everyone's handling it the same way. So first it may be a nonverbal, then you may give the child a verbal directive that goes, reminding them this is not the expectation of class. The third maybe pull them out and do a one-on-one conferencing. The fourth may eventually be okay, now you owe me a give back and we're going to sit down with a teacher leader or dean. And then the fifth may be bringing the parent in. I think that's important, norming the practices first as a school
Mhm.
across your teams is very, very important. It creates transparency for the children and unity among all staff members. Um, and then the second small task is just focus on the tier ones that you can handle without a consultant being around, whether you need to create a calming area in your specific classroom or within your school building and get the staff involved as to what are the expectations at that calming area. What do you want there at the calming area? Get student feedback as to what they want there within the calming area, within their class space, or within the school building, to bring them back to a place where they can go into the classroom and learning, and then just start teaching circles. So get a group of teachers that have buy-in, whether it's one or two, allow them to do the readings, allow them to do the outreach. There's tons of Facebook groups that I'm actually a part of, free. They'll tell you free knowledge, like check this resource out, check this book out. Here's a PDF, try this at your school, and go back and forth and start sharing on best ways of handling one-on-one conferencing or circles.
So circles can be done without having an official
Hmm.
restorative practices in my
Hmm.
class.
Yep, it can.
Mhm. Okay. Now, if it's not an official thing, advisory is going to be ideal if you have an advisory at your school, because
Hmm.
I could see maybe some of your administrators, maybe even parents complaining that too much time was spent on circles and
Hmm.
not on the curriculum and instruction.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, I want to know if there's anything that we haven't touched on so far regarding restorative practices that you would like to add to the conversation.
um I think the biggest thing is to lean into your discomfort and get the children and everyone in the circle to understand you are at the right place in the right moment of time when you feel uncomfortable in a circle. And what I mean by uncomfortable in the sense that maybe I did do something wrong, because now you're reflecting, and that's a good thing. And that's what you want to express to the children. And then the second thing would be, as an adult, please say I'm sorry to your students. If you did wrong, you go a long way with apologizing and owning where you went wrong. Please be vulnerable to your students and let them know where your headspace is at, where you are at in your space right now, in your mind or physically in the classroom. It goes a long way with students as well. And that's where I would want to leave like this conversation, is for people to just be mindful of those things.
It's not always easy to be vulnerable.
I know.
But you're right.
Especially students, the older ones, it really isn't. But they respect you more when you are. And don't hold a grudge.
Don't hold a grudge. Wow. Those are some powerful words. Don't hold a grudge. Unfortunately, we see a lot of that happening where, a teacher will hold a grudge for a student, and then their older brother or the younger brother or the younger sister comes by and in their class, and then they still have that grudge from the older sibling.
Exactly.
And these brand new kids don't get the fair shake that they should get because they're different people. However, it's that last name. And
they'll hold a grudge from the day before. I've seen teachers where, and I did it myself. I was guilty year 1, 2 of teaching, where I'm like, oh, you did that to me 2 days ago, and I'm not going to forget. But then I realized, who is this hurting? Like, it's hurting me because I'm angry every time I see this child, and it's hurting him. Like, he's a child. It's cognitively appropriate for you to push my buttons. Now I just laugh it off. Like, the kids just think I'm bipolar, and I'm okay with it. You think I'm bipolar, I'm smiling, and then stern look the next minute, I am all good. But the kids love it. The kids want discipline, but they want firm but warm discipline. That's what they want.
Yep. Davina, I've learned a lot. I definitely appreciate you and the work that you're doing. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, connect with Edgy Grind, what's the best ways to reach you online?
So you can reach me on Instagram at The Edgy Grind, or you can go to the webpage at www.theedgygrind.com. You'll see my email there as well. Very simple, theedgygrind@gmail.com.
It is very simple. Well, Davina, it's been a pleasure. Again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care.
All right, folks. Another one in the books, restorative practices. So I am not going to use restorative justices anymore, or restorative justice anymore. I think that explanation made a lot of sense in regards to when we hear the word justice. In that sense, it often signifies disciplinarian, penal systems, and things like that. Restorative practices to me sounds a little bit more community-based and more all-encompassing. So that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from today's conversation. I think some other things that really stood out for me was just the importance of making sure that we're not just circling up when things happen or when things go wrong. It's circle time. No, we should be doing that as a regular practice. I would even recommend doing these things at home. I mean, I've had the experience of working on a reservation, and I've had the experience of participating in circles out there. I would love to be able to do those things in smaller settings, small groups as well. I think it's beneficial, not just for your students and for school communities, but also I think it makes a lot of sense whenever you're in community situations, because again, with the hierarchy, you have a rectangle table, someone sitting at the head of the table, and subordinates are often sitting on the sides. But in a circle, everybody's on the same level there, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate folks for paying attention, for hanging out with us today. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel today. And let's remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.